The calling to be still, it's not just a suggestion or like a nice idea that we post on social media when everything is going great in our life, but it's a command for us. It's a calling for us. As disciples of Jesus Christ, we are called to stop striving, to stop panicking, to stop trying to hold it all together on our own, and instead we are called to be still, to abide in Him, to find our rest in Him, to take the time to stop and to remember who is actually in control of things. Because, friends, when we are still, we remember of who God is and how He can act for us.
What do you fear the most? You know, some people commonly fear heights. Many people fear public speaking, small spaces, all things like that. All things that don't bother me a bit. I actually enjoy many of those things. But you get me near a lake with alligators or anywhere close to a Doberman Pinscher, it's a whole new story. I was actually bit as a child by a Doberman, and so a lot of things surrounding that I'm fearful of. So we'll start off looking at Daniel right away. And Daniel, what are your fears? What are you fearful of?
My biggest irrational fear, well, it might be rational, is deep waters, like deep ocean kind of stuff, like and all the things that it holds, because we don't have our whole bottom of the sea mapped out yet, so we don't know what's down there.
Which is crazy when you think of the technology we have I mean, how vast. In fact, top of my head, isn't the Earth like 80% at least water covered by? It's amazing. In fact, the funny thing is in Scripture, the early Christians, they were really fearful of the water. I mean, that was something. The deep and the water was something that was a big fear to many of them. So I saw this and I wanted to share because we like to have some humor when we can. I found some of the less common phobias that may seem silly, but these are real recognized conditions. Now, I will tell you, I am going to wildly mispronounce these. I'm going to do the best I can because I'm guaranteed that you probably can do a whole lot better. So the first one is this. All right, I'm going to do my best here. Hippopotamus-equipt-delephobia. Completely butchered it. That's the fear of long words. Makes sense, right? Or there's arachibutyphobia, which is the fear of peanut butter sticking to the roof of your mouth. Awful stuff. What about, compoundophobia, the fear of buttons? These things can be scary. Globophobia, fear of balloons. What about the amphilophobia? I think I said that one right. The fear of belly buttons. Or anatodeaphobia, a humorous-sounding fear that a duck is watching you. That may be my favorite one, the fear that a duck is watching you. Who could have that one? Okay. What about linophobia, the fear of string? Or pagonophobia, the fear of beards? Obviously, Daniel and I don't have that one. And a few more. What about phobophobia? That's right. It's the fear of developing a phobia itself. Then we have bananaphobia. You guessed it, fear of bananas. And then lastly, we have trypophobia, the fear of clustered holes. I actually work with somebody that has that fear. I want to share a story of an Arab chief about a spy who was captured and then sentenced to death by a general in the Persian army. Well, this general had the strange custom of giving condemned criminals a choice between the firing squad or the big black door. Well, at the moment of execution, when it drew near, the spy was brought to the Persian general, who was asked the question, what will it be? Will it be the firing squad or the big black door? Well, the spy hesitated for a long time. It was a difficult decision. He chose the firing squad. Well, moments later, shots rang out, confirming his execution. Well, the general turned to his aide and said, they always prefer the known way instead of the unknown. You see, it's characteristic of people to be afraid of the undefined. Yet, we gave him a choice. And the aide asked him, he said, what lies behind the big black door? Freedom, replied the general. I've known only a few brave enough to take it. I think of this and you think is incredible how people would choose something they know that leads to a death that could be brutal, yet they fear something possibly even worse in the unknown. And I bring this up. I like this story because Jacob explained in his message on Sunday about how God was leading his people out of their oppression from Egypt, and they were in misery, to the midst of deliverance. You see, fear took hold of the Israelites and caused them to doubt where God was leading them. And so it's funny that, these people were slaves, yet because of the fear of what might be happening to them, they sometimes thought, maybe we just need to go back. It was the unknown, the fear of the unknown that Jacob was talking about. And really, you look at based on the events just in the past couple of weeks, people all around our country have legitimate fears from tragedies and evil. So Daniel, what have you seen? The latest news, I know Jacob, I thought, did an amazing job praying for the people around the assassination of Charlie Kirk, both his family, of course, and then the family that was involved in this shooting. And what are your thoughts based on kind of the fear of the future, what we've seen lately?
Yeah, I mean, we've, besides that, we've also seen the 2 school shootings that happened, one at the same time of the Charlie Kirk assassination. And I don't know if it's just society getting numb to the fact that these things happen on a daily basis here, or just detachment from life in general. But we as Christians need to be praying for not only the victims, but the perpetrators of the violence, as we're called to pray for those who persecute us and those who we perceive as our enemy. And that's getting harder and harder as these things keep happening.
That's such a good point. And I love the word that you use, becoming numb. I think this is human nature because it's always what's the next big story. We're really upset about legitimate harm and evil that's going on in our world. Exhibit A of what you talked about the latest school shooting. Yet as soon as something else happens, then all of a sudden we think of the next one. What about all those families who lost people or had kids that were at that school? Their entire lives are turned upside down, yet you tend to forget about it. We become numb because it happens time and time again. And as we as Christians are called to be aware, to have empathy. And you can't imagine if it was us, what we'd want people to be praying for us. You see, it's so easy to get caught up into the anxiety and the fears around us. So are we walking unknowingly into the next mass shooting event? Is this the world our kids are actually growing up in? Well, just like the Israelites worried about the presence of God in the midst of their fears, we have often seen God come through in the past, right? We've seen answered prayers, but we still have a fear when trouble arises, as if we've completely forgotten about God's promises and past miracles. We just keep thinking about what's in front of us, not what he's done or delivered us from in the past. You see, last week we left off in the moment that God spoke to Moses in the burning bush, asking him to lead his people out of Egypt. So we see in Exodus 3, verse 11, "But Moses said to God, 'Who am I, God? Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh, the king, and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?' And God said," I love this line, "I will be with you." He's not saying you're greater than Pharaoh. He's not saying you're all powerful and you just need to gather up the courage. God's just saying, I'm asking you to do this. I'll be with you, which should be great comfort to all of us, no matter what God asks us to do. He is with us. And he goes on, he says, "And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you. So when you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God on this mountain." Here again, you will. He knew what was going to happen. Well, Moses kept finding excuses for why he was not the best person to deliver the chosen people out of captivity. And every time Moses gave God a reason why he couldn't do it, well, God just showed him why he was the perfect person. God chose him for this mission, and that was enough. Just like when he asks us to do things, he asks us because he knows with his power we can do it. And chapter 5, verse 1 goes, "Afterward, Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh." So Moses had his brother Aaron with him, right? And he's going to Pharaoh now, and he's asked for his people to go. And they said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." Well, as you can imagine, Pharaoh, I'm sure, just mocked at them and laughed at them. Who is this Lord? Who is this person that I should obey him and let Israel go? He has to be thinking, I'm king over all this land. Why? Who can tell me what to do? He's used to being able to do his own thing. And he goes, I do not know the Lord. I will not let Israel go. Well, then Pharaoh then decided to make it even more difficult for the Israelites, and he doubled down on the work and the troubles and the persecution on the Israelites, which of course made Moses and Aaron even more disliked by the Israelites because, number one, they were slaves, but now all of a sudden they're having to do even more work and harder labor because Moses is trying to get them released. I think of and many of you have heard the story of how many plagues, how many times, and I know Jacob brought up the frogs and the locusts and the water turning to blood, and every one you're just thinking, I can't imagine how bad this would be, and it seems like every time Pharaoh's like, oh gosh, this is so bad, I need to let them go. But then he changes his mind, right? We keep hearing keep reading in Scripture, his heart is hardened. He's like, I can't let these workers go. These are the people that do all of our work. Until finally, they got the final plague that was just, they couldn't do anything else, right? That's when death to all the firstborn of each household, including the animals, is what finally allowed Pharaoh to say, you know what, just go, get out of here. They were finally free. Can you imagine what that freedom would feel like? I asked a friend of mine, many of you know Austin Rasmussen, Pastor Dan's son. I asked him if I could share this story, and as he always is, very gracious, and said yes. When I think of freedom and what it's like to be free, my wife and I have been visiting Austin on and off. Oh my gosh, for over a decade, in and out of jail for different things that he's been in for, as many of you have. And I just know every time he would be in there and then get out, we'd see some of the same habits come about. And it's just like, when is he ever going to find freedom? I talked to Dan so many times, and Dan would always be the first to say, God can do what God will do. We know that God can change somebody's life like that, but repeated behavior, negative behavior, you just almost expect the same thing. And so when Austin got out this final time in April, this past year, I think a lot of people just assumed, okay, it's great that he's out, but how long before he goes into his same old habits? But he came out a changed man. He started to come into church willingly on his own. He made sure that he was helping his parents out. He was kind. He was generous. He was loving. He was respecting people, and he thanked people for standing up with him for all of these years. And this is the mindset that I get, the image in my mind of somebody who really appreciates freedom and finally took a hold. It's like last week when we talked about taking those chains off. Everything I've seen, Austin has taken those chains off and is allowing God to do great things in his life. And I love this image of freedom in his life. Now let's go on to Exodus 14, verse 10. That says, as Pharaoh approached the Israelites, looked up, and there were the Egyptians. So all of a sudden, remember, the Israelites were following Moses. They're coming up to the Red Sea. And all of a sudden, Pharaoh decided, after all, I've got to go bring them back. We need them too much. Well, marching after them, they were terrified, and they cried out to the Lord. Was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us up out of the desert to die? I mean, think about this. Moses got them away from their slavery. And now because they see the Pharaoh and his army coming, they're just assuming, all right, logically, we can't fight them. We have no way out. And so they're going to blame Moses, who's been the leader of this at the same time. Goes on, didn't we say to you in Egypt, and these are the Israelites saying, leave us alone. Let us serve the Egyptians. It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die out in this desert. How easily they forget, right, of God's promises. Well, Moses answered that people, do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance that the Lord will bring you today. You see the Egyptians you see today, and you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. I know Jacob mentioned this last week. It's so hard in this culture. It is hard for me to be still. But when we have this anxiety, this trouble in our lives, be still. Meditate on God's word. Meditate on prayer. Ask God to do things that we can't do ourselves. You know, it's funny how God works in our lives and allows things that we read and see to line up exactly what's going on in our life. Because just this week I was reading through a daily devotional from Bob Goff, and he brought up a great story that's actually the incredible ending to the story of Moses leading the Israelites to the Promised Land. And this is kind of the end of the story of what's going to happen to the Israelites reading the Promised Land. So I want to share this devotional that I read this past week. It says, after a generation of wandering around in the desert, 12 spies were sent out from the Israelites' camp to check out the land that God had promised them. Well, 10 of the spies came back bad-mouthing the land, right? The Israelites were filled with fear because these 10 reported how much bigger, how much more fortified everybody was in this promised land that they told they were going to be getting, and how they wouldn't be able to take it. Like, it's just too much. We can't do this. But 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, well, they returned a completely different take. They were brimming with hope. Well, why was that? They didn't bemoan their condition. They didn't look at what the impossibilities and didn't look at the reality of just think, I can't do this. You see, they rejoiced in what they saw. And here's why. They knew that God delighted in them and in the land that he had led them to. And in their words, it says, because he, God, delights in us, the land is as good as ours already. They were full of faith and vision. But sadly, the Israelites listened to the 10 spies instead, who were afraid to enter into what God had promised them. So 40 years later, yes, 40 years later, after the 10 spies had passed on, Joshua, who by then had taken over for Moses, led the next generation into the promised land. I think it's just a great story that it's so easy, right? It's so easy to look at what's in front of us and seeing the impossibilities, instead of looking at God who can overcome that if we put our faith and trust in him. So Jacob asked us at the end of his sermon these following questions. He goes, what fear has been pressing in on you? What fear has taken over your mind? Number 3, what fear has taken your focus off of Jesus? So put your hope into Psalm 46 that says, God is our refuge and strength, an ever-present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear. So, Daniel, I'm going to ask you, do you have a favorite verse that helps you through any kind of fears in your life?
Yeah, I don't know where it's from, but the be still and know that I am God. And I think that goes hand in hand with another verse that says, who of you by worrying can add a single hour to your life?
Yeah, that's perfect. I mean, be still and know that I am God. We actually have that on our wall in our house. That's
Psalm chapter 46, verse 10.
Actually, when I think of mine, there's a lot of verses that I like to cling to. And one of my favorites comes down to Romans 8:31. Therefore, what can we say about such things? If God is for us, who can be against us? What do we have to fear? And I don't say this not because life is easy, not because trouble disappears, but because God is with us. You see, the Lord Almighty is our fortress. That's not wishful thinking. It's not naive optimism, but it's a promise. It's a reality of who God is. You see, being afraid isn't failure. Staying afraid is. I'm going to repeat that again. That's John Acuff, the author, said this. He goes, being afraid isn't failure, but staying afraid, that is. We're not trusting in God then. So as I mentioned just a minute ago, my verse to overcome fear is Romans 8:31. If God is for us, who can be against us? The answer? Nobody. Nobody is greater than God. He's proven his love for us. Have a great week.
Like and subscribe.